Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playbook for Leaders and Entrepreneurs. Today, I have a very special guest and someone I consider as my mentor for becoming a better speaker. I'm so excited to introduce Chris Wilson. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your playbook for success with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Siddharth.
Thank you so much. Chris, you are a successful entrepreneur, a professional public speaker, and an endurance athlete completing one of the most grueling races in the world, Ironman triathlon. With all the things you do, what drives you? What's your mission with this?
Well, my mission has moved, but my mission really is to enable people to use their voice to create impact and influence, mainly through selling, but however they want to speak, I believe that a voice needs to be heard.
And how did you get into public speaking, by the way?
Do you know, it was a question somebody asked me the other day, and I've always spoken in lots of places, but actually it was a podcast by a guy called Lewis Howes, and he has a really good podcast that you could probably go and listen to. Mm-hmm. And he was suggesting going to Toastmasters because it was something where you can meet new people, you can practice your craft, and he just said it's a really good way of growing your speaking. So February 2022, I went to my first Toastmasters, and I've been going ever since. And it's really encouraged me to develop the skill of the voice and public speaking and audience, and also evaluation, listening and learning from each speech that you do.
100%. Toastmasters is definitely a game changer. And I'm curious to know, were you always a great speaker, or this came natural to you? Because you mentioned you used to do speaking events before joining Toastmasters.
Well, your audience can judge, because when somebody says, were you always a great speaker? I never get complacent about any speaking opportunity. And I think that the day that you become complacent about speaking is the day that you have lost your edge. So thank you for saying that I may well be. But every day is a different day, and my mission is to continually evolve. And I'm quite my worst critic in some respects, because I'll see things or hear things that I think I could just develop that better, or you'll take a speech and there'll be some evaluation. So I'm always looking to try to improve.
Love that. And Chris, let's get to know you a little bit more. Please could you give us more insights into your business and personal life so our listeners can get to know you a little bit more?
Okay, where would you like to start, business or personal?
Okay, start with business.
All right. So my business is called Speak and Serve, and I mainly work on the sales aspect, but how do we bring our voice to a sales interaction? So my top of the funnel tactics is things like webinars or speaking or podcasting or YouTubing to try to create a voice attention seeking message. And then from that, it will normally pull a prospect or a lead into the sales funnel. And then again, I'm using my voice to try to create good discovery calls, great proposals, and then hopefully the client says yes. So that's my particular business expertise, using the mechanism of voice, selling tactics, and great listening to try to create a prospect's commitment to say yes.
And I think that's very important, because I believe AI cannot replace our public speaking, how we speak, etc., and how we negotiate with clients. So I think this is quite important to get
and I think
speaking.
AI, it's such a wonderful tactic, but equally, it can create almost a false marketing message, because the AI messaging looks so brilliant in perhaps our emails or our copy or our LinkedIn, but then you meet the prospect and you're looking for the same kind of intrigue or information that you had in your marketing messages from the AI. But actually, when you speak, you're devoid of all of that insight or information that your AI avatar or messaging has created. So I think the two have to be in tandem.
Interesting. And tell us about your personal life as well, your hobbies, your interests, etc.
Well, I've got two boys that I'm really proud of, and they keep me busy. They're kind of older now. One's a teenager and one's just into his 20s. But my personal life is a mixture of self-pursuit of endurance. I'm a very big advocate of looking after yourself from a health perspective and also a mindful perspective. So I'm often out running or doing silly endurance tactics. And I'm also a great believer of living for the day. My mother always said, you have one life, so love life, living life. So I'm a great believer of being grateful for getting up every morning, putting my feet on the floor and saying, what can today bring me? Because I may not get another one.
Love life, live life. I love that. Let's talk a little more about public speaking. I saw one of your YouTube videos where you mentioned that you were given a late notice for a speaking competition, but you still went for it and competed. So my question is, what motivated you to step up and compete despite feeling unprepared?
Well, I think over Christmas I tested my dad jokes, and my dad jokes are not I'm not known for my humor, but I'm trying to be more funny. I won't try any
Yeah, it
jokes now.
was a humorous competition as well, by the way.
It was a humorous competition, and my speeches are often a little bit deep and quite edgy, and they really pull on some of the emotional
Mm,
levers of how we need to be perhaps more human and have better intentions. But this particular speech, as you know, with Toastmasters, was one to
mm,
be humorous. And you all know, or the listener might know, that you have club competition and an area competition. So I won my club round, and then the area competition I only came second. And I was under the belief that as a second place person, you wouldn't then go into what you know as the division. So I kind of
mhm.
rested. And then on the Wednesday, before the Saturday of the competition, I received an email to say, looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. And I hadn't even prepared for the fact that I was going to speak, but I also wasn't happy with the
Mm.
speech that I had pre-prepared. So I took a deep breath and thought, you know what? Life is for taking the bull by the horns and saying yes and then finding out what follows. So I said yes, ripped up my speech, and then created a new one that you saw me deliver on that Saturday.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your speech as well. You want to tell our listeners what it was briefly about?
Well, it was under the messages of Christmas and actually was kind of around my dad jokes. And we have a game called Quackers and Crackers. And I, as the maker of the quacker joke, has to create a joke that competes with the retail joke that's in the cracker. So we pull the cracker, and then in the cracker, I placed my dad joke. And then the boys or whoever's around the family have to vote on which joke was best, dad's quacker joke or the Christmas cracker joke. And it's just a moment of theatre that is more about the occasion as opposed to the joke itself. So I described that game being played out at the Toastmasters, and obviously I played a few Christmas jokes as part.
Nice. You also mentioned in your YouTube video, you referred to something called the man in the arena. What is that?
Well, that is a speech that is part of my journaling, actually. So I have a journal which is here. It is my current journal. You can see it's all dated. And
Do you
then into
journal
that
every day or?
every day, yeah. And in there, I have a few favorite speeches. And one of those is the Man in the Arena speech that was done by Freddie Roosevelt on the 23rd of April. And it's a really good depiction of it's not sometimes the man that struggles, it's the person that decides to go into the arena and actually is prepared to. In the day, it was a gladiator and the man that's prepared to struggle and fight, but
Mhm.
also isn't bothered about the people that might be poking fun at them or mocking them, because it's the person that's willing to be in the arena that
Mhm.
braves the challenge of victory or defeat.
And what would be your advice for someone who's hesitant to step into their own arena and take that leap? Because they might be also feeling unprepared for something, let's say.
Well, there's so much there in that, in terms of why are you hesitating? And is it hesitation because of a belief that somebody's given you in your past that you're perhaps not good
Mhm.
enough, or you shouldn't, or you can't? And sometimes we have this almost dreamlike state that people put us in because of their beliefs or expectations. So first of all, why
Mhm.
are you hesitating? Is it because somebody's told you you shouldn't? And then the other hesitation is sometimes around the fear of failure. And I think somebody's going to mock me, or somebody's going to not like my speech, or it's not going to be delivered. But my own belief is that when we fail, actually the biggest learnings come. And if you're not failing enough, I think you're not trying enough.
And you mentioned like fearing what other people would say or when we fail, etc. And what's your advice on how can we build resilience towards the judgment of others?
Well, just look at your own day, perhaps, and
Mhm.
you might see a social media podcast or a video or a short that you thought was just an abject failure. But
Mhm.
within 2 minutes or an hour, you've completely forgotten about it and you're now focusing on something else. And yet the person that is worried about being judged or thought badly by others will dwell on that thought for perhaps days, weeks, and even months. And the longer they dwell on it, the more the manifestation of fear ensues. But actually think about the person that is judging your video. They'll have forgotten about you within a blink of an eye, and they'll be happily mocking or judging or being horrible to other people, and you'll have been forgotten about.
That makes sense. Let's talk about your Ironman journey. What inspired you to do the Ironman race?
Yeah, it's one of the longest endurance events in the world in terms of a discipline, and just for authenticity there, it's 3.6 kilometers in the ocean and then 180 kilometers on a bike and then a marathon to finish. So it's 3 disciplines back to back. And I did mine in Nice, which is quite a difficult one because it's hot and also lots of ascent on the bike. But I went through a pretty bad life internal experience with my own shame and ridicule and guilt associated with some business failures. And also I wasn't particularly healthy. I was overweight and wasn't really doing routines. And triathlon was my ascendance out of my own failure, really. So I started doing triathlon, which led to a Olympic distance triathlon, which led bigger and bigger. And the Ironman is sort of the epitome of triathlon. So it was my own way of getting out of my own way, really.
If you don't mind, you want to talk about the business failure and why it impacted you so much?
Yeah, so for 13 years, I was running a conference and events company, which we grew really, really well. And it was performing well. But the regret in hindsight is that we aligned ourselves to a big company that was really a big company in a very small nest. And in December of that year, I took a call and they said, I'm very sorry, but in 2018, we're going to completely change the revenue model, which means that your business is now going to receive significantly less revenue. And we had baked a lot of fixed costs into the business, perhaps overstretched ourselves. And quickly, the business was unable to meet its costs and had to be closed. And personally, I took that really, really badly and created quite a lot of self-persecution and shame and guilt around that, which led me into a very negative personal spiral, which actually almost ended end-of-life strategy for me. So yeah, I was in a very low place, but triathlon, endurance events, and just getting out running in the forest was my own healing and sort of my own therapy, really.
How was your training for the Ironman race? How do you train for it? Is it like I can just sign up for the Ironman, or I have to do a few qualifying races before? Because I want to do an Ironman as well one day, maybe.
Well, I'd first suggest that you might want to start small. So my first triathlon was what's called a sprint triathlon, which is very small. It's 400 meters in the pool, and then a 5K or a 10K run, and then 20K cycle ride, and normally a 5K run. So quite small. You can do it normally about an hour. And that's where I'd suggest anybody starts, because an Ironman is, it's very expensive. There's quite a lot of, there's no restriction to entry. So anybody can apply into the Ironman and buy the event. But the actual training, it was a 2-year mission for me. So I started to do bigger and longer events. And then in the year of the Ironman event, I actually worked on running the London Marathon, which I did. I went into the Yorkshire bike ride, which was another one, and then did the swim. So I put all 3 separate disciplines into 3 separate tins, really, did those. But it is literally just constant training. And it's waking up in the morning when it's cold and it's dark and thinking, the training plan today says I need to run 10K. Therefore, you just need to go out and go and run 10K and be really, really committed to the process, because an Ironman is a classic example of, it's not a sprint, it is a marathon plus. And it's not about the seconds or even the minutes. It's about starting and finishing in one piece. Mind is one of the biggest aspects of an Ironman, because the mind says, why are you doing this? You could stop. Nobody's telling you have to do this. And it's just this self-propelled desire to want to get to the finish line that is about an Ironman discipline.
if the training was tough, why you didn't stop? Was it like you want to get over the failure of the business that was driving you to keep pushing on those days, but it was cold outside? Was driving you on those days?
A combination of many things. The business aspect was showing that when things are hard, if you can do this, then other things that look hard probably pale into insignificance. But actually, the Ironman itself, unfortunately, my father at the time developed pancreatic cancer, which is a very tough cancer. And actually, within 2 months of my Ironman, unfortunately, he passed. I knew that on the day of my Ironman, he was tracking my progress, because you have a little tag which is tracking your progress. It's like a little blue dot that appears on the app, and it moves obviously in synchronization with your movement. And I knew that my dad was at home watching this blue dot, and every time I stopped, I knew that he would be becoming anxious about the fact that Chris was either ill, had fallen off his bike, or had just pulled out. So there was this secret jet engine behind me going, you have to carry on, because if dad sees you stop, that's going to make him worried. And right now he has enough worry about his own health without worrying about his son as well. So that was a really big driver to push me on and get me past the pain, because really my own pain was short-lived. It was 12 hours, and his pain was something that he wasn't able to walk away from.
So sorry to hear, Chris, and thank you so much for sharing that. Let's talk about leadership more now.
Mm-hmm.
What are the characteristics of an effective leader, according to you?
I think overall, Siddha, the quality of a leader is they have to make decisions, because the decision has to be made, and the leader sometimes is the one that has to say, this is what we're going to do. It may not be the right decision, or it may well be decided in retrospect that it wasn't the right decision. But at that point in time, I think a leader's overall responsibility is to make a decision. I think the second one they need to have is the ability to listen, not necessarily listen to make that the decision that needs to be made, but I think a leader that decides to take decisions in isolation without weighing up the pros and cons of where they go next, I think is important. I know we were just talking before this about Steve Jobs, and you're reading his autobiography by Walter Isaacson. And I think he's a great example of making decisions based on his own belief, but also making a decision based on feedback that some others give at the time. So those would be two: taking decisions, having the ability to listen. But three is about being inspirational. They've got to have the strategic thinking to see things that other people don't see, or feel things that other people don't see. And I think it's about that ability to have a helicopter view of where the business is at, where the team is at, where the people are at, and almost look down from above and decide where the leader needs to drop in to fix things, and then again go back high and hover, and then drop in on something else. So it's the ability to not get stuck in the detail and be willing to see things that other people can't see, or feel things that people can't feel. So those would be my three main facets, I think, of leadership.
And how can we become better listeners? Because some people just stay quiet and they're listening, but in their mind, they're ready for their answer. So how can we stop from doing that and really listen what the other person is saying? How can we do that?
Well, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? But we just need to listen and pause and really listen. There's some exercises that we can do sometimes, particularly if we're speaking, and we have to try to be impromptu. And I do this sometimes with clients, is that they're often thinking about the words that they need to deliver. But actually, if you have a conversation, quick fire with them, and then change their tact quickly and say, talk about ice creams, talk about birds, talk about the earth, talk about the sky, talk about planes, quickly the brain has to adjust and think. But you're really in the sport of listening, because you're so intent on what's happening next. You're not even thinking about the words that should or could be said. You're just delivering the words. So listening it's a two-way sport. And I think the best listeners are the ones that are really focused on eye contact. They're mirroring, they're giving rapport, they're giving body signals to show that they are really in touch with the individual. And the time that you're thinking about your answer while the person is talking, I think it suggests that perhaps you're thinking about your own ego as opposed to listening with the person in mind. And I think also for leaders, particularly if they're making a big decision, the leader is the last one sometimes to speak. So they'll ask for the opinion of the team. They'll go around the table and ask for all the opinions. And then the leader speaks last. Because what happens when the leader speaks first, everybody follows the leader, because that's what we naturally do. We follow the tribe. But if the leader speaks last and then canvasses all the opinion and also brings the introverts and the extroverts out to speak, you bring in all the opinions, and then the leader might say, is there anything else we should talk about before we make a decision? Pause. And then the leader says, based on everything that's just been said, I think that we should do this.
That's a useful tip that I'm going to take away for sure, Chris. And I think I heard this on your podcast called Prime Your Life. I love the podcast, Chris, by the way. And you mentioned one of the leadership trait being less judgmental. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think we have societal, like we talked about earlier, about beliefs, and we're almost trained or privileged to live in the world that we live in sometimes, and we immediately judge people. And I remember a story that I shared on another podcast when I was going across a car park in Tesco's, and I watched, as I got out of my car, this little lady, an old lady, she was probably in her late 70s, and she was almost hugging the pole of the Pelican Crossing by the supermarket doors. And I watched person after person after person just walking past this little old lady because they were so intent on getting into the supermarket to do what they needed to do. And I took my time, I walked across to her, respectful of her space. And I simply said, are you okay? Can I do anything? And she just looked at me and she said, oh, thank you so much. My eyesight's really poor. And I know that my daughter's over there, but she's got the kids in the car, so she can't come and help me. I just need to get across the road because my first steps are always my hardest. But once I'm on the Pelican Crossing, I can get across. So I said, well, is it okay if I take your hand? And literally, she said, that would be just amazing. And I walked her across the Pelican Crossing. And she got to the other side, and then she knew then she could get to her daughter's car. And it's not necessarily judgmental, but I think that's just an example of we don't necessarily see humanity because we're so intent on what we're trying to do or what we're trying to achieve. And maybe another example, I remember running the Barcelona half marathon, and it goes along the beach, and along the beach, there's lots of homeless people. And immediately people were sort of saying, what are they doing? Why, how dare they do what they're doing, which is basically sleeping rough. But what if the person that was sleeping rough, what if the day before they were on a railway track thinking that they were going to take their own life because a train was coming? And maybe they've moved from that position to now being homeless. It's a huge step, isn't it, in terms of their own survival and their own decision to be here. But sometimes we only see what we see because we just see homeless person. But behind every homeless person, there's a story. And sometimes we bring our own judgments, beliefs, blinkers, blind spots to what we see, as opposed to thinking, is there something here that I'm missing, or am I making a determined decision about something that I feel? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, 100%. I love that. Seek to understand. We always judge on what we see, but it might be deeper than that. So it's quite good to not to get all the facts or just understand everything before we judge someone. Yeah, that answers the question. Okay, final question before we wrap up. Chris, what would be your advice for someone who's struggling to build confidence to speak in front of the public?
Well, we know the answer to that, which is simple, which is go to Toastmasters. If you're not aware of what Toastmasters is, international organization, and actually their strapline is where leaders are made. And it's the most psychologically safe place where you could go to practice your speaking in a really warming place, which encourages feedback, encourages people to try. And it's only, I think, in the UK, we pay about £15 per month. And I think it's the best personal development you'll ever get if you want to learn how to speak. Another way, you could find a coach, whether that be working with somebody like me to help you coach. But the best way is just to start and challenge what is driving your internal fear, because you're only really given two fears in this life, which is the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else has come as a learning of something that you've encountered, or somebody's told you something that you've now made yourself fearful or lacking in confidence on. Remember when you were that little tiny child and you have this desire to wanted to walk, and there is nothing on earth that would have stopped you from having that internal desire to get up and try to walk. You fell over, you bruised your knees, but your parents, your loved ones, your care holder, whoever it was, encouraged you to say, you can do it. Yes, you can. Well done. Well, if you could have that desire to walk, if you could, what's stopping you from having the same desire to want to speak?
Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. How can you and your business help the clients become better speakers?
My website, speaktoserveandsell.co.uk or .com, has lots of different resources. I run a 5-day program. The next one, I think, is starting in the week of the 10th of February. It's a kind of Valentine special, Learn to Love Yourself Through Speaking. So that starts on the 10th of February. Or I have a very simple free offer where you can download my ebook from my website, and that gives you some clues on speaking and selling. If you want to have a call with me, or equally, we could do a quick discovery to find out where you're at and how coaching or a program might help you with that.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoy talking to you, and I've learned a lot as well. And for our listeners, I will link Chris's all social media handles in the show notes so you can follow him. And also make sure you follow the show and leave us a review, because that will help me get more interesting guests like Chris on the show. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you leave us a comment on what's your key takeaway from this episode. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Thank you, Chris, once again.
Thank you, Siddhant. Good luck.